Thanks everyone for joining us. Excited to see a good group joining here on this frigid Friday to really talk about business continuity and get focused on the difference between a real business continuity plan and a backup program, and how some of the latest technology in the server space with Hyperconverged is having an impact. So happy to have or to be joined today by Stephen Freitag, VCIO and business analyst here at Alevity. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining. Stephen, if you could give everyone a little bit of your background and some of your experience.
Absolutely. So I have been with Alevity for 5.5 years as a VCIO, supporting clients in our Chicagoland market with really the goal of helping them build a technology roadmap so they can help achieve their business goals. And a big part of that has been built around the security portion and backup and disaster recovery. And that comes a little bit from my background of being a server architect with a large retailer and supporting over 800 servers with them. And so it's been a main focus of mine and a main focus for our clients, just to make sure that they have the right infrastructure and technology to support their organization and their business goals. So
great. Good. Well, thanks. When we talk about this topic, there's a lot of things that get thrown around. And oftentimes I think people think that they're interchangeable words, but I think they mean very different things. When it's, backup or disaster recovery or business continuity, which is the phrase that we use probably more often based on the solutions that we provide. But tell us a little bit about what's considered a complete disaster recovery strategy and how those different phrases all work together.
Yeah, I mean, to me, a disaster recovery plan is just a formal document. It's created by an organization based on the needs that the client has. It's based on their ability and what their requirements are for an RTO or an RPO. And if you don't know what an RPO is, it's the recovery point objective or the recovery time objective of how much data they can potentially lose and how fast they need to get it back. And the other thing to think about is in regards to business continuity, as it relates to that, it's really the holistic plan of what does it look like for a natural disaster or a power outage or a cyber attack or anything that might disrupt their organization, and how fast they need to be able to get that data back in general. So there's a lot of factors that go into it and a lot of different ways that we're looking at it and having a discussion to make sure that it works for that organization.
So what are some of the critical things that need to be thought of and thought through? I think everybody thinks about like the worst case scenarios. Your building burns down or tornado blows it away. A flood happens in the server room, but clearly those are the things that need to be thought through. But what are some other scenarios that organizations need to think through, or you coach them through considering when they're building out their plans?
Well, quite honestly, I think especially we're in the time right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and nobody really thought about a pandemic and how it might impact their organization. And I wouldn't necessarily call the pandemic a disaster, but it sure created a lot of disruption within an organization. It created a disruption in regards to what it might look like as far as having people working remotely trying to get to internal documents, and what it looked like for throughput into their organization. So there's a little bit of a COVID element, but the biggest part that people forget is also the human element. We see predominantly where it's simply somebody deleting a file. And I know as a VCIO, getting that call from a business owner because they're in the middle of an audit or something like that, and somebody's accidentally deleted a file thinking they were moving it to another location, and it's sending the auditors into a tizzy. And it's a very important thing to really factor in the human element to it. The cyber attack element. What happens if they get a crypto locker or ransomware, and how fast can they get that data back? There's a lot of vertical ramifications too, as far as, am I a financial FINRA regulated environment? Am I medical HIPAA? Or, what is my business doing, and what's the dollar amount per hour that I have disruption into my organization? And that's a big part of it as well.
Yeah, I think the last 12 months have proven to us how important it is to have a critical piece of the disaster recovery plan or business continuity plan, which sometimes isn't thought through enough, which is, okay, we want to make sure all of our data is protected, or all of our data is available in a another environment, whether that's a different building as a DR plan or in the cloud. But what happens if we have to go use that data, and how do people get to it if they don't have access to the desk that they've been sitting at? In March, when everybody got, grabbed their laptop or got laptops issued to them and everybody headed home, it was, okay, now we have to give everybody access to this information, which is probably a pretty good trial run for what might happen if you really had a situation where you had to activate that business continuity plan.
Absolutely. I think that, we've all done it within our own organization, is, a levity. We've done it with clients. We've done disaster recovery tests, and a pandemic is something that we really didn't think about because, holistically, because it wasn't something that was going to be for a week or 2 weeks, while we got the environment back up. It's been going on for almost 10 months, and there's been a lot of changes that organizations have had to make, as far as not really wanting to be a mobile workforce, and now they're forced to be a mobile workforce, and look at the hardware requirements that people have had to change and make to sustain their organizations through this time. So it's a very interesting time as we look at this.
Has it only been 10 months? It feels like 10 years.
Well, depends on who you're talking to right now, I guess. So
let's talk about a little bit more. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention earlier, questions. We'd love to hear from you of the questions that you have. Of course, we can listen to ourselves talk all day, but we'd love to answer questions that you have. So in the Zoom channel, kind of below the little screen that I'm sharing here, the slide with our wonderful pictures, is a little Q&A box that allows you to ask questions. So please utilize that. We will answer them as we go or at the end. Of course, if you have comments, like if I sound terrible or I don't make sense, you can let us know that as well in that section. So Stephen, let's get a little bit more into maybe some of the details of a plan, of a business continuity plan. You need to have the programs in place, the access to the right things. But what's the frequency that you recommend where organizations are grabbing a snapshot of data and doing something with it?
That's an excellent question, and a lot of times that's a dialogue that we're having with business owners to figure out how much do you believe your data is worth, and how much can you really sustain losing. And a big part of that is typically we're seeing every hour that we're backing up data, because a lot of owners can't say that they can lose 59 minutes and 59 seconds worth of data because it's just detrimental to their organization. But there are a lot of factors to that. Some organizations were backing up every 15 minutes. Some require more than that. But there's a lot of technical factors and hardware factors that go into it, as far as, what does my storage look like? Do I have enough storage to be able to keep this retention and be able to do the backups? And what is my CPU? Do I have enough processing power to handle that? Can the networking handle it? Can my applications handle being backed up all the time? And then what is the data priority? Because maybe we don't need to back up everything. So maybe it's a customized plan to say that our CRM and our ERP application is getting backed up every 5 minutes or every 15 minutes, but our file shares aren't getting backed up as often. And so there's a lot of elements to that. And then you have to think about the retention portion of it, of how long do I want to have that? Do I need to do a 7-year retention? Do I want to keep it for a month? There's just a lot of factors that go into that. But most commonly what we're seeing with a lot of, and predominantly within the market, is backing it up every hour.
Yeah, and I think other considerations are where that backup goes, or at least that snapshot, right? If you're going to do it that frequently, is it local? Is it local then to the cloud? Is it direct to the cloud? Those are considerations that have to be thought through. And then, do you have the bandwidth to be able to do that and continue to run the operation?
Absolutely. I mean, do we have the ability to sync, a terabyte worth of data going offsite all the time? A lot of organizations don't have that much data, changing all the time. So we're really only doing a differential at that point. But, how much data is changing? Where's that data going to? A lot of the times, like, how fast can I restore it? Like, if it's going cloud only, how long is it going to take to get my data back in so that I can actually keep working? So there are a lot of factors, and as it relates to that, the cloud is becoming a much it's becoming a better option for a lot of organizations because they don't have to factor in some of the local storage costs, and the storage cost of the cloud is starting to go down. So there's a lot of factors of that, and it's definitely an interesting thing to be working on. And I think the pandemic has changed a lot of things as we even look at that portion of it and where the data is living full time. So
we talked earlier about those phrases that are somewhat interchangeable. A backup, which is getting a copy of your data off of the production system, whether that's local, whether that's off-prem, whether it's in the cloud, whether it's all of the above. A DR plan, which is typically, I think, thought of as a second location somewhere else. Maybe it's another office that you have, or just a totally different location that has maybe the same setup replicated, which is, I think, maybe more of a historical, typical environment. And then more business continuity, that you want to ensure that business can continue, and usually the backup and even the DR plan is part of that. What do you hear clients ask about, and what kind of guidance do you give them about, should my backup and DR be on-prem? Should it be in the cloud? Should it be somewhere in between? What do you see, and what do you recommend?
Yeah, and this is, again, the last 10 months have made this an even different conversation, for sure. But do you have, as an organization, do you have a suitable second site that we might be able to move this to a remote site? Is that remote site, is it secure? Can you manage it? Those are some of the factors that we really put into this. Also, do you have the bandwidth in between those? We see a lot of times, people putting these into place and not really having and taking into a lot of the elements that are in between. Some of the other things to think about are, is your remote site too close to your organization? If you're going to have something, again, everybody does think about like the tornado or flood, or depending on where you're at in the United States, the earthquake, wherever you're at, a lot of people put into thought the location. And sometimes it's just not safe enough to say that I'm going to store something 5 miles down the road at another office location. And so that's where it becomes, do I have a remote site in another geographical location? Is it my site? Can I keep it secured? Things of that nature as well. So
good. All right, I'm just looking to see if we have any questions. We don't have any just yet. Looks like one just came in. So we have, looks like they have several branches and offices across the state. How should things be considered to ensure uptime and availability if an issue occurs? And I think this is maybe a little bit more towards the infrastructure and the technology that might be in place.
Well, yeah, and so this gets into an interesting part, and one of the things that we've talked about, or one of the parts of this conversation, is hyperconverged. And with hyperconverged comes, a different mentality to it, where we can have a hyperconverged infrastructure where it might be your main office might have what we call a cluster, and we might have a place where we have remote sites where you have an individual office that doesn't need this type of infrastructure, quite honestly can't handle this type of infrastructure. But if they did have some sort of a disaster, that we can replicate it back to the central office, and they could even work off of the central office potentially while this outage is occurring. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of hyperconverged, is thinking about, I don't really have a true DR site to be able to do these things, but I got all these other offices that are running. How can I make this economical and affordable for my organization, but also keep in mind all of these other factors that we're talking about as far as RPO and RTO as well. So
yeah, that ability to have that set up and to be able to kind of turn on a dime or pivot, kind of an overused word today, but be able to pivot based on the situation is definitely a real value of that technology. And one we're having a lot more conversations about. The traditional days of a big server or a server in a rack have really transitioned to organizations thinking more about a node approach with hyperconverged. And I think that's a really exciting development, and one that many customers are gaining some significant benefits from as they look to make that transition.
Yeah, in the days of having, a giant server farm and SAN that's replicating them across sites, and the cost of having different vendors and finger pointing happening, and having a hyper-converged instance where I can have these small environments, I can have my main central office, if you will. I can have different approaches to, replicating them across sites. I can even have a DRAS service that is fully supported by these hyperconverged environments, where I'm still calling the same person and they're still supporting it holistically, is a very, very important thing as we look at this. And I think as a VCIO, as we've looked at this with different clients, we're always trying to pay attention to where the finger pointing is happening. And again, it goes back to how fast can we get your data back, and how fast or how long is too long for you not to have that data to keep you up and running. And hyperconverged has really started making us think about that from a backup and disaster recovery plan, and a true business continuity plan as well. So
How often, when you get into these conversations, have organizations really sat down and had those conversations with their business units to say, what are the critical applications, and really seriously, how long could you survive without having access to that application? The whole, RTO, RPO conversation. How often do you find where you have a conversation with a company and they say, yeah, we've had that discussion, we know what it is?
quite honestly, I think it's fewer and further between in small and medium-sized businesses. The key is having is having those conversations. I think in the last 10 months, that's become a much bigger thought process. It's definitely something that we've we've been requested to have more conversations on, because now there's the fear of the unknown of things that maybe we haven't thought about in the past. Pandemics weren't really something to think about as we were talking about a business continuity plan, and now it's like we got to start thinking outside of the box, on other things. And I think that I know I've been having that conversation a lot greater, as far as, how often is the data backed up, how often is it synced off site, how long do you think it would take me to get back up and running? And the biggest factor to this, as we talk about this, is backing it up to the cloud and running on the cloud is a different element than having a hyper-converged environment that I might be able to sync it to another site and still have my workload somewhat internal to my organization. Because sometimes the putting it to the cloud and what your speed looks like of your throughput, a lot of organizations are asking how fast can we get it back on site, depending on the application that's there. So to answer your question, and that was the long-winded answer, I believe, but to answer your question, it is much it is a much greater conversation with the business owners that I'm dealing with on a daily basis, of making sure that they have a correct plan on that as well. So
Yeah, good. And a great question just came in. And thank you for those that have submitted questions. The biggest question at the end of the day is, there's a ton of great technology. There's all of these different ways to ensure that data is protected, but the business it has to make sense for the business. There is definitely a cost factor associated with all of these things. So the question is there an ROI template, that gives some variables, a sliding scale, whether it's the amount of data, the bandwidth, how big will the differentials be, and how all that relates to the RTO and RPO. What do we do to help organizations think through, okay, there's all of this great technology, but the business can afford or can't afford to not have X, Y, and Z in place. How do we help work through those numbers and help people make the right decision?
yeah, this all comes down to partnerships that we have with other organizations as well, that they live and breathe this on a daily basis, and they have some very unique tools that do assist us with this, and we have access to these tools as well, that help us based on that. And a lot of the times, this is it feels like we're almost interviewing you for what type of thing that you're looking for, and we have to know the answers as far as what the cost by hour is, how often you can live without that, and things like that to really develop that. But yes, we do have a template for that to determine, what the size of your infrastructure needs to look like based on the number of retention points you have, based on how fast you need to be able to get it back, and really then tie each application back to the loss of business based on how many hours it's not available. And then it does tie back to the second question that I'm looking at here, saying that, these all go into various types of occurrences, right? Of an office going offline, a tornado that could impact both locations, or some other type of disaster, such as a crypto locker that could impact the entire environment, even if it's spread across different locations. And so, yes, we have a template for this that we use that's able to build an infrastructure that, hopefully, thank goodness, it will cover all environments or all scenarios that are out there as well.
Yeah, a whole grid going down because of fire at a power plant is definitely one of those, at least for the folks in Madison where I'm based, that happened last summer. And a huge section of downtown was out of power for a good period of time. And of course, it happened to be on like one of the hottest days of the year. But those are real world things that happen, unfortunately, and everybody's got to be able to plan for that. So yeah, we have tools. We definitely can roll up our sleeves and have a strategic decision about how those things can have an impact to the business and what the costs are, and at the end of the day, the return on that investment. So we'd love to have a further conversation about that with you or with anyone. It doesn't look like we have additional questions. Stephen, anything else that we didn't cover that you feel would be valuable for everyone to hear?
Honestly, I think that pretty well covers it. I think that, based on those questions, there's a lot of things that go into this. This is just a very, very high level. And, we'd love to have the continued conversation of impacts or issues that maybe you're having, or, strategies that you want to have and implement within organizations, because backup and disaster recovery and having a business continuity plan, to me, is probably the number one important thing that we can be focusing on right now for organizations. It also has to deal a lot with ramping up and coming out of 2020 and 2021 in the right way. And I think the organizations that are ready to come out of this are going to have a lot of great success. And this is just part of it. And it gives us some time to focus on what's right and what's necessary for our organizations. So.
Yeah, good. And as you mentioned earlier, definitely a critical part of the technology roadmap that we really work to engage with our clients to get built out, to really look at what that long term looks like. Maybe you don't have a great business continuity plan, but other priorities are in place that you just can't address it this year. We want to help them kind of plan that out, make sure that it stays on the priority list for when it is time to attack it. We document all of that and work closely with you to line that up with the business. So again, all things we'd love to be able to help you with and work through. If you have questions, maybe a good place to start is by just letting us know. Of course, you can reach out to your account manager. You can reach out to your VCIO if you work with one. If you don't currently work with one and you're an Alevity client, we'd love to start that conversation and see what we can do to help get you on the most current version of our technology program, of our technology management plan. So alevityit.com/assessment is another great way just to raise your hand and let us know you'd like to hear from us, and we can get something scheduled to talk through that. Also, alevity.com/events is where we have all of our webinars, thought leadership webinars on different activities and events going on. Boy, we're really excited, hopefully in the next 90 to 120 days, to start to have some in-person type events where we can have speaking engagements and maybe share something cold in a glass. We're really looking forward to hopefully having those things happen soon. So feel free to engage at that location on our website to get scheduled for things. And again, Stephen, thank you for joining us. I think it was really informative and valuable. Business continuity and a solid DR plan is critical for everyone, and we want to make sure our clients are really thinking about that and engaging us as much as possible. So thanks for joining us and all the great knowledge that you shared.
Perfect. Thank you guys as well for joining and taking some time out of your day.
Have a great weekend, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day, and let us know what we can help with. Take care.